I assume we're all comic fans here, or somebody just stumbled in accidentally looking for directions. How many of you would like to produce your own comics? All right, that's good. We need more comics. What I am about to describe is what I learned by doing. For 25 years, I wrote each comic by drawing each page out by hand. When I say drawing it out by hand, I mean every panel, every picture, and every word. I would take a legal pad and I would draw the shape of the page on the pad, and then I would draw the first panel. This is how I created Nexus, and I thought, well, how do I start a story? I want to grab the reader's attention. I want him to invest himself in the story. I want him to know, most importantly, what happens next. And I thought, well, if the protagonist, every time he showed up, somebody died, that would be dramatic. And that's not a new revelation. That's why for over a half century, for centuries in fact, our entertainment has been dominated by law and order shows, legal shows, medical shows, because those professions deal with life and death, and that's the stuff of drama. But I didn't want my protagonist to be a villain. I wanted him to be sympathetic. So I made him a reluctant executioner of mass murderers. And when I finished that first panel, which shows a nervous dictator having a dinner, a lush dinner to celebrate himself, when somebody comes running in as his boss, there's somebody here to kill you, then I thought, what happens next? What happens next is the most important question in fiction. Because if the reader doesn't care, he's not going to turn the page. But before I get into that, I want to talk about drawing each page out by hand. By doing it that way, and because I was a frustrated artist, that's why I tried to teach myself to draw for years and years. I thought, well, if Bernie Wrightson can do it, I can do it. But that didn't happen. I bought books on drawing anatomy. And if you are interested in drawing, probably the best single book to get is Dynamic Anatomy by Bern Hogarth. There are hundreds of books on drawing anatomy, and many are specifically aimed at comic book artists. Dave Ross has one out that's very good, and also Figure Drawing for All It's Worth by Andrew Loomis. Okay, that's how I started, and I knew I had to fill 24 pages. And I always had the dramatic arc imprinted in my brain. A story is a dynamic narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And by dynamic, I mean that the situation is always in flux. Because if you have a story where the protagonist is a smug, middle-aged businessman whose life is going perfectly, can pay all his bills, he loves his family, they love him back, and he's looking forward to playing golf, and that's what he does, you don't have a dynamic narrative. In a dynamic narrative, the character's fate is always in flux. He's up, he's down, what will happen next? And that's called suspense. Now there's a principle which I would like to demonstrate that's at the basis of the type of story we enjoy. And this is the principle. It's a little wooden peg, it's a little stick you use to stir your coffee. Tension and release. Think about that when you're writing. Tension and release. And that's one of the basic principles of drama. But to get back to the page that you're drawing, it doesn't matter whether you could draw or not, although it doesn't hurt to look at those drawing anatomy books and figure out how to draw basic human shape. If you can only do stick figures, do stick figures. if he can only do two-dimensional renderings of spaceships or monsters or buildings, do two-dimensional renderings, but draw them yourself into the panel because it teaches you so much. It teaches you how much weight a page can bear, where to put the pictures. And once you put the pictures in, you add the words. And that teaches you, well, how many words will comfortably fit on this page? Comics are a visual medium, but they're also a multi-medium. They're a combination of words and pictures that draw you in and excite the imagination, ideally. Now, as we all know, us lifelong comic readers, most comics aren't very good. In fact, we usually end up picking comics up because we say, holy shit, look at that art. That's great art. I got to have that book. So we buy the book, we take it home, and we read it, and we think, oh man, I wish the writing were as good as the art, because usually the art is better, or it used to be. I remember buying book after book based on the art. The first time I saw Joe Steranko or Neil Adams, it knocked me out. The same with Bernie Chaikin, Bernie Wrightson, Howard Chaikin, guys like Paul Galassi and Barry Windsor Smith. When he started to do Conan the Barbarian, I could not believe that art. I had to have every issue. Now, those stories were better written than most because Roy Thomas based them on Robert E. Howard's stories. And that was a sound literary framework. In fact, when you see a graphic novel based on a novel, and I worked on a few myself, including Timothy Zahn's Star Wars novels, you can rest assured that that's going to be a pretty good comic. And the reason is they wouldn't turn it into a graphic novel or a comic if the book itself were not a success. And books have to succeed on words alone. So you get that, you turn that into a comic, and you have a sound basis for an exciting story. That's the same thing with television. We all watch television, and it's true of television as it is from every other creative medium that 90% of it is not good, and only 10% is good. But when you come across a TV series that's based on the writing of a very good writer, I think of Michael Connelly in particular in his Bosch series, which is probably the best detective series, police detective series I've ever watched or read. It's because each one of those seasons is based on one of his books. It's based on a sound literary foundation. And if you read books, we all read books. You have books that you love, and you have books that you get a third of the way in, and you say, and you toss it aside. I've read 90% through a book and waiting for something to happen, then I realized, well, I don't like this book, and I just set it aside and I forget about it. But when you find an author who grabs your imagination and you can't wait to turn the page, that's the basis of not only a good novel, but a good movie or a good graphic novel. So the question is, how do you make the reader care? And there are an infinite number of ways, an infinite number. But I'm just going to name my personal three. Is one, you create a fascinating character that people can't get enough. Sherlock Holmes is the number one example of this in the world. He's the most popular literary character in fiction, and one of the most popular in other media, too. He's in television, he's in movies. I think there are even songs about him. And the reason is his character is so intrinsically fascinating and quirky that you can't see what he's going to do next or how he's going to figure it out. Now, for those who are Sherlock Holmes fans and may not know this, it seems obvious to me that he was autistic. And I think that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was a physician, understood that condition as well and adapted it when he created the character. But we will follow Sherlock Holmes anywhere. So, fascinating character. Number two, a fascinating situation that's irresistible in and of itself. Jurassic Park, to me. is the prime example. What? A movie about dinosaurs? Yeah, I'm there. And it's fiction, you know, people interacting with dinosaurs. What could go wrong? Well, the answer is everything. And we secretly suspected that before we saw the first movie. And we were rewarded because, of course, things do go wrong in Jurassic Park, and man finds himself fighting dinosaurs. Yes, sir.
So I would argue Jurassic Park still falls under your category of it seemed a little bit of something that worked because it was adapted when already was material that be or series in a novel. Right.
Huh? Shout it out. I'm hard of hearing.
Yep. He said it was a Mike, right? No, Jurassic Park. So
Yeah, right. I knew that, and they just left out Michael Crichton's name. All praise to Michael Crichton. I don't want you to think Sir Arthur Conan Doyle created Jurassic Park.
No. What I'm saying is that you sort of find that the movie was the original.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, I didn't mean to say that. Well, you know, what I meant to say is based on a great book, and that's why it's a good movie. But the situation itself, which Crichton hit upon, is intrinsically interesting, which is people interacting with dinosaurs. And it's been used time and again. And the third element, I would say, to create reader interest is a seductive narrative voice. Now, this is harder to achieve in a comic than it is in either a novel or a movie. I just saw a movie called Blue Moon, and it was about the partnership between Richard Rodgers and Lawrence Hart, who was his lyricist for many years. Rodgers and Hart, they wrote many musicals, including Pale Joey. And then Rodgers decided he wanted to go in a different direction, so he hired Oscar Hammerstein as his lyricist. And the movie, Blue Moon, is about Lawrence Hart wondering what the hell happened to his life that Richard Rodgers should dump him in favor of Oscar Hammerstein. It's about an evening in their life, the evening that Oklahoma debuted on Broadway. The character of Lawrence Hart is played by Ethan Hawke. And I couldn't believe it. I watched half that movie and wondering, where's Ethan Hawke? Where's Ethan Hawke? Well, he was Lawrence Hart. I could not believe it. He's a great actor. But that's just an example of a seductive narrative voice, because the language in that movie, and we've all seen movies like this, where the dialogue is so scintillating and interesting in and of itself, that's the star of the movie. That's why we watch that movie. Not to see huge explosions or people fighting with dinosaurs, because the dialogue is witty and fascinating. There are a lot of artists, there are a lot of writers who do that as well. If Richard Price is one. He wrote I'm trying to think. Well, he wrote, among other things, Mad Dog and Glory. He wrote the scripts to many movies. And his dialogue is intrinsically interesting as well. I'm trying to think of his first book. It was about a gang in Brooklyn and the struggles they had. But anyhow, Richard Price is a very good novelist. He's one of those guys who you read because he has a seductive narrative voice. Now, there are two means of having a seductive narrative voice. One is to be invisible, and that's Michael Connelly. And by that, I mean when you're reading a Michael Connelly novel, you're not aware of engaging in artifice. You're not aware that you're consuming literature. You're so immersed in the story, you become part of that story, and you resent anything that jogs you out of the story, like, honey, dinner's ready, just a minute, let me finish this chapter. That's a one extreme. At the other extreme of the seductive narrative voice is a flamboyant voice with a voice of its own. Shakespeare had it. Anthony Burgess, who wrote A Clockwork Orange, has a very distinctive narrative voice. He's one of those guys that you have to have a dictionary at your elbow while you're reading his book. And the guy that wrote The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, what's his name? All right, I'm drawing a blank here. He's a great writer, and he went on to do some screenplays. He also wrote a novel called Telegraph Avenue, which is about a record store in Berkeley. And there's a chapter in it that's 3,000 words long. And who? Michael.
Michael Chabon.
Thank you. Michael Chabon. Was this novel in Telegraph Avenue that's 3,000 words long. It's about a parrot that escapes its cage and flies around the city. And it's all one sentence. I couldn't stop reading it. You start reading that chapter, you're going to go all the way to the end, 3,000 words with no periods. And then you get to the end, you realize, whoa, that was all one sentence. But let's get back to the comic. When you're writing those words out, you try to make the dialogue fit the story. And it's aside here, is if you're writing a comic, it's of utmost importance that your people sound the way real people talk, that they don't sound awkward. Now, one thing I've noticed in comics, especially superhero comics, is the way they address each other by their name in every panel. What should we do, Batman? Well, I don't know, Supergirl. What would you do? Well, Batman, I would. Well, thank you, Supergirl. I mean, like we don't know who they are. That's not the way real people talk.
I just want to say that superhero comics don't really do that anymore.
You come on up to the first row, so I can hear you. I'm so old I saw Hendrix.
I guess I was just saying that superhero comics don't really have that kind of dialogue anymore.
Well, I'm glad. I haven't read that many lately. I read the comics that are produced in our nether zone where we crowdfund our own books. Occasionally I'll read a corporate comic, but not often. We've all opened a comic and seen a page with 500 words in 10 narration boxes blocking up the art. And when we see that, the eyes glaze over and you think, oh man, this looks too much like work. And you may finish that comic or you may just set it aside because it looks too much like work. You have to have words in a comic. They're essential to the story. And the proof is in the phrases that come down to us that we all know by heart. Like, face a tiger, you just won the jackpot. Or it's clobberin' time. Or in brightest day, in darkest night, no evil shall escape my sight. The reason those words resonate is when they first appeared, they were a perfect pairing of words and pictures that had come together in a way that resonated. You can't do that every time, so it's a mistake to try and make every word balloon a mic drop. Just remember, people have to sound like real people talk. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't invent your own language, because I have seen some people do it. They will introduce a word into the conversation that nobody's heard before. But as you go on, you find out that their use of that language is part of their characterization. It helps us understand who they are. And there are also ways to portray English that have not been done that should be done. And one of the examples is I always notice when people say I'm going to, it sounds like I'm gonna go downtown and buy a 6-pack of beer. So I started spelling it like that in my fiction, both comics and novels. And no one noticed except to say, I've never seen that before, I like that. So keep your ears open. Carry a pen and pad with you at all times. So this is advice for everyone, whether you're interested in writing or not. And write down every idea, every name that sounds interesting that crosses your mind. I write things down. The very act of writing it down helps fix it in the memory much more than entering it into your notepad in your phone. Sometimes when I'm writing, I'll introduce a character because the scene calls for it. Someone has to deliver the DoorDash, for example, or bring in a telegram, or a plumber to fix the plumbing. And then when you get towards the end, you realize that person you created for incidentals becomes integral to the denouement of the story. So don't hesitate to do that. You want to avoid duet mahina, which means that you just pull the ending, the ending out of your ass because you couldn't think of a way to do it naturally, and that's what duet mahina means. The ends out of the machine, and you have to earn that. That means you plant. Some people call them Easter eggs, but other people say that it just happens serendipitously. Well, it happens serendipitously if you're a good writer. Chekhov had Chekhov's rule, which means if you showed rifle on the wall in the first chapter, somebody has to use that rifle by the last chapter. And there are a lot of ways to put it. I'm trying to think of, well, Elmore Leonard has 10 rules of writing, which I urge you to check out. But getting back to writing the comic in that page, you realize you want to open that comic up, that it can't all be panel after panel of dialogue. In fact, that would get very tiresome unless you're a brilliant writer. And brilliant people who write brilliant dialogue usually don't waste their time on comics. There are a handful that do. But for the most part, we stick to literary creations for that, and it's called literature. It's funny, every time I fly, in the back of the seat in front of me, it says only literature here, and I'm always tempted to take out my Sharpie and write Chekhov, Nabokov, Mark Twain, but that's not what they mean. They mean printed paper stuff. So when you open it up, what's worthy of a full-page splash? There are a couple things. First of all, unveiling an ancient civilization. If you have an aerial view of a fascinating landscape and a good artist, that's always worthy of a full-page splash. Secondly, the climactic moment of a fight. And I do this very rarely, and I love to do fights. But I don't think you should waste a whole fight on a single punch, especially if, say, the Hulk is waving his fist and there are 4 pairs of feet flying off the panel in all directions, which Kirby used to do, because that's not showing the fight, and it's not taking advantage of the medium. Since the ascent of the modern martial arts film, we've become enamored of careful fight choreography, intricate, sometimes beautiful, sometimes jaw-dropping. That's one of the reasons we all watch the John Wick movies, although each successive John Wick movie is stupider than the one before it. But one thing that they never stint on is that the martial arts choreography, it's so fast, and if they were to slow it down, you'd see exactly what movies they are doing. There's so much more to fighting than just throwing punches or even just kicks. Martial arts involves joint locks, takedowns, pressure points, things like that. And if you can show it, if you know how to show it in a comic, and this is harder to do in words than it is in pictures, and it's one of the reasons that I drew out each page, is because I understand these movies and I can show them to the artists the way they should be pictured. And I always tell the artists the same thing. Hold your camera still and let the figures do the moving. Avoid extreme close-ups. Nobody wants to see an extreme close-up of a punch hitting a chin. They want to see where it came from and how they got to that point. So you show your protagonist fighting, and you use the martial arts choreography not only to excite the reader and show them something they've never seen before, but to help characterize your protagonist, because the way they fight says something about them. We watch these kung fu movies, and it's, your kung fu is no match for my karate, which is a ridiculous statement, but it's an interesting statement too, when you have 2 evenly matched proponents, because then you get to compare kung fu to karate, and believe me, they're very different. On the other hand, whenever we see this in a movie, it's because the 2 protagonists are completely unmatched or not evenly matched at all, especially if it's a Chinese production where the Chinese guy has to go up against a Japanese invader. But they're fun to watch. And the fight choreography keeps getting better and more intricate. But sometimes fight choreography is all there is, as I've noticed in a lot of those movies, not just the John Wick movies, but Ballerina, which is an outgrowth of John Wick, where you have this delightful woman who's obviously very skilled and very athletic, throwing around 250-pound guys like beanbags. It's just not realistic. The more realistic it is, it can be as flamboyant as you like, but the more realistic it is, the more the reader buys it, the more satisfying that fight scene is going to be. Now, what else do we devote a full page to? How about an explosion? If you've seen one explosion, you've seen them all. The only reason that people devote a full page to an explosion is to say, impact, that was a big explosion. Wow, what a big explosion. Occasionally, I have devoted a big panel to an explosion, but I never devote the whole page to it because then the action stops while the reader admires the explosion. So when that happens, I'll put a horizontal panel along the bottom with maybe 2 panels in it to advance the story. Same thing with anything, even with the big reveal of the monster. You turn the page, there's the werewolf. What a terrific werewolf. The action stops while you admire the werewolf. So you put an insert panel down at the bottom, and the werewolf says, "Where's my sandwich?" Or whatever. It was, "Where is his sandwich?" You turn the page to find out where the sandwich is. Make every panel count. Don't waste time treading water. And we've all seen comics that do this. We've all seen 6-page miniseries that could have been told in 1 issue. The greatest master of the comic book form was Carl Barks, who created Uncle Scrooge and wrote Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge comics for many years. And if you haven't read his stuff, you're in for a real treat. They're wildly entertaining. There's not a wasted word or picture in any of those books. His treatment of Donald Duck is exemplary. If you only know Donald Duck from the cartoons, you think, well, he's just a hothead who's always flying off the handle. But in Carl Barks' hands, he was an everyman. And he exhibited every facet of human behavior, except cruelty. He was never a cruel person. Did you see Donald Duck as the mailman, conscientiously driving his mail truck along the edge of a sheer cliff face to deliver the mail to people out in the boondocks? Or Donald Duck as a salesman? I'll never forget this one. Donald Duck takes a job as a salesman. He comes back and he didn't sell anything. And the manager grabs him by the throat and says, "You like gumption, Duck. The way you sell things is you scream your pitch in the customer's face, and when they drop to the floor in shock, you shove a pen into their hand and scrawl their name on the contract." And Carl Barks was full of that sort of thing. Now, I did not use to outline, as I said, but now I believe in an outline. And I think it's very important for a number of reasons. There's 2 reasons. One is to guide you where the story is going so that you know where the story is going before you start. I have to tell you that every outline I've ever written, I have invariably veered away from the outline because I find a better way to tell the story. And one of the reasons is research. If you research your story, for instance, I did this for Bronze Star. Was Oscar Wilde in the American West during the 1880s? Well, yes, he was. He gave a lecture in Leadville, Colorado to the miners about the aesthetics of art, and they loved it. So I put him in the latest Bronze Star, which we have for sale down at our table, by the way. And I also looked up, was Wyatt Earp available to go to Cobb's Gap? Yes, Wyatt Earp was available, and so was Calamity Jane. They're not in the graphic novel, but they're in the novels that I've written that will be out this fall, Bronze Star novels. And if you research your story and you're looking at, say, the bow and arrow, the use of the bow and arrow, how is it possible to fire an arrow from a galloping horse with any accuracy? Now, then you learn that the Mongols under Genghis Khan learned to loose their arrows when all the four hooves of the horse were off the ground. They would time it like that, and they were deadly accurate with those arrows. So that's where research leads you. That's the first purpose of the outline. And I just got sidetracked on research changing your story. And don't be afraid of it. Research everything. There's no excuse not to. People will find you out. And the second purpose is you want to write that outline as a pitch for the reader. It's not just for yourself. It's for readers to read. And what you want to do is you want to say, here's my outline. Tell me what you think. They read the outline, and they put it down, and they say, holy shit, where do I get the book? And that's the purpose of the outline.
So what format is the outline supposed to be in? Like, so what does the outlines look like?
Well, I would try drawing the page each out, drawing each page out by hand.
No, I thought you meant the narrative outline.
You mean the outline, the narrative outline?
Yes, because I thought that was what you were talking about.
I often write that after I've done with the story, but not these days. Now I write the outline first. My methods have changed. The purpose of drawing the page out by hand is understanding the medium, where to put the words, how to put the words, how to describe the action. And as I mentioned during the martial arts sequence, is vital to describe that action realistically to the artist. And one thing I'll do is I'll go online and find a demonstration of that technique, and I'll put the web address in the script and say, take a look at this, stop the video, freeze the video when you want to see exactly what the martial artist is doing, draw that image, advance a few seconds, and this could be the seconds, first of all, the seconds before contact, and then the contact, and then what happens when they're making contact. Because a lot of people, when they're fighting, they make contact, and it's not just a punch and walk away, it's not just a kick and walk away, it might be a flurry of punches, or it could be a throw, a hip throw, and that has to do with the placement of the body, where you put your weight, where you put your feet, and what pressure you exert on your opponent and where. And that's what demonstrates to the reader an exciting fight. And that's what makes drawing the fight worthwhile. But you have to spell it out for them or act it out for them. And I've done that before. But then there's other techniques. I mean, how do you demonstrate how to drive a car fast? Well, that's hard to do. You can do it in dialogue, but be careful of dialogue. Now, here's a scenario I'm going to describe to you that may seem very familiar. You open the comic, and there's a full-page splash of a superhero or heroine in tights fighting off a dozen monsters. And the caption says, well, here I am fighting off a dozen monsters. You wonder how I got here. And you turn the page, he says, 12 days ago. And it shows the superhero or heroine walking down the street in his or her cities. And she says, I was just minding my own business, delivering pills to the elderly, when suddenly a car of clowns pulled up next to me and they leaped out. And then you see a car of clowns pull up to her and they leap out. Well, don't do that. I have 3 rules of writing. Number 1 is it's your job to entertain. Never lose sight of that fact. You want to grab the reader by the throat. Forgive me for repeating that. And I've described some of the ways you do that. And one of the reasons that nobody goes to the theaters anymore or buys comics is because they don't entertain. Number 2, and this is of paramount importance in a visual medium, is show, don't tell. And that means any information you can give to advance the story visually without having someone explain it, you should. Now, sometimes you got to use narration to advance the plot, especially when they're discussing the heist ahead of time, like in Ocean's 11 or any of those heist movies. This is what we're going to do. We're going to sneak in. We're going to dress up as janitors. And then, of course, everything goes wrong. But you have to know the plan ahead of time. And number 3 is to be original. Well, how do you do that? Well, one thing is to base your characters and situations on your personal experience in real life. And this only works up to a point, because when you read great historical fiction like Con Iggulden, who wrote a 6-book history of Genghis Khan, which is where I learned about those horses, he went to Mongolia and lived in a yurt for a couple of weeks while researching the book, but he was not there 1,800 years ago when the Mongol horde was born. He has to imagine it, and he does that by research. It's the writer's job to imagine the point of view of every character he includes in his book. And to do that, you have to read broadly, you have to understand different situations, and have to travel as much as you can and get to know different people. And that's how you do it. At this point, I've run out of steam, and I welcome questions.
Where? I'm over here. First, I actually am here to accompany my spouse who is working on something, but I want to say what you said was excellent. I can't believe how many great points you gave. I thought of My Dinner with Andre as a tricky dialogue, and I thought of the Roald Dahl's short stories.
Yes.
That when you were talking about inserting something and then coming to a conclusion, his short stories were amazing. And I wanted to ask, hold on, I did actually have a question and I cannot read it.
I know how you feel.
Go ahead, I'll look someone else in the last minute.
Sir.
So, my apologies if I was too, disruptive. But I did have something to say about the whole idea of using a single panel to take up an entire page. Because I think there is one author who does that very well and in a very unique manner. And that is the Japanese horror comic writer Junji Ito. I know him. A lot of his stories are really kind of like the ones through EC, where you have a slow build-up to something horrifying happening, and then at the very end of the comic, the monster or supernatural threat finally shows itself in a single full-page panel.
That can work. In the hands of a master, that can work. Because sometimes we buy comics because we love the art so much. If you come across a panel of a monster you've never seen before drawn in excruciating detail, you're just going to stop and admire that and think, whoa, what a monster. Which reminds me, check out Bronze Star 2, which is at our table downstairs, and you'll see just such a monster. This one involves the Wendigo. Speaking of research, I had no idea I was going to write about the Wendigo, but I knew I wanted a superstition that was common to all Northwest American Indians. And the Wendigo is endemic to every tribe that lived in the Pacific Northwest. And the description was very specific about the Wendigo. The only exposure you've had to Wendigo is Marvel's Wendigo. That's not the Wendigo. That looks more like a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch, which is coming, by the way. But the Wendigo was a 7-foot-tall creature, skeletal, with the hindquarters of a buffalo, massive antlers, a skull-like head, and a blue heart beating out of its chest.
Actually, the Wendigo does not get in it, whereas in the original folklore, that is an invention of the short story The Wendigo, published in 1910. What?
Okay.
I remember my question.
Weird.
Do you think certain themes can be overdone, like Greek mythology, where people pull from sources? Do you think, like, certain states can be overdone, like the supernatural of Greek mythology, or as you said about being original? So where,
Anything can be overdone. They say there are only 7 plots in fiction. There's boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy regains girl, A retired CIA assassin comes out of retirement to avenge the death of his father. You know, I look for movies to watch on Netflix and Prime, and just every other movie is about a retired CIA assassin. So I'm writing a book where every character is a retired assassin except for the protagonist who has no skills. That's it, folks. Let's say that. You do it. Yes, sir.
I do have a question. What would you say to aspiring comic creator who want to do the art all themselves, but they find it easier for designing the characters, but for the rest of the art is beyond it?
Well, you know, comics are a visual medium, and as I mentioned, we often buy comics because we're struck by the art. We say that's a beautiful art, and a comic isn't that expensive. Even today, at $5, well, that's the price of a Starbucks coffee. I'll shell out $5 for a beautiful comic. And what we love about comics is the individual aesthetic that we recognize. Because if you're a comics aficionado, you can tell at a glance who drew certain pages. That's Jack Kirby, that's Neil Adams, that's Barry Smith, that's Jim Lee, that's Todd McFarlane. You can tell at a glance. AI can't do that, and they never will be able to do that. And that's why comics are here to stay, and they're not going to become the prisoner of AI. AI just can't do comics.
Thank you so much.